England, 1823. The coastal road between Bath and London had never been particularly forgiving, even in the best of weather. The coachman had chosen the longer route skirting the Dorset cliffs to avoid reports of flooding on the usual inland turnpike, turning a familiar journey into something far more precarious. In late September, with autumn storms carving channels through the chalk cliffs of Dorset, it became something approaching treacherous. The hired carriage lurched through another rut, and Lady Evelyn Marlowe steadied herself against the worn velvet seat, her fingers gripping the edge hard enough to leave marks. At 29, Evelyn had grown accustomed to discomfort. 5 years as an orphan, 5 years living on the charity of her well-meaning but hopelessly impractical aunt, had taught her to accept whatever circumstances presented themselves with quiet dignity. The threadbare interior of this particular vehicle, arranged hastily by her cousin Edmund, was simply another indignity to be borne. Through the salt-stained window, the sea stretched grey and restless beneath gathering clouds. The wheels rattled over loose stones, and somewhere up front, the driver's slurred singing suggested he had found companionship in a bottle rather than sobriety. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly, wondering if she should have insisted on delaying the journey. Bath to London in one of Edmund's economy arrangements, she murmured to herself. What could possibly go wrong? The answer came with horrible swiftness. The carriage gave a violent lurch that sent her tumbling sideways. The singing stopped. A wheel struck something with a crack that echoed like a gunshot, and then the entire vehicle tipped at an angle that defied nature. Evelyn's scream caught in her throat as the world tilted, as the door beside her flew open, as momentum carried her through that opening into empty air. Her hands found purchase on something. Anything. Rock. Earth. The crumbling edge of the cliff face. Below her, waves crashed against stones with a sound like the end of the world. Above her, the overturned carriage teetered on the brink, one wheel spinning uselessly against the sky. The driver was gone. The horses were gone. There was only Evelyn, dangling over an abyss with fingers already beginning to slip. She had time to think quite clearly that this was a remarkably undignified way to die. Her aunt would be devastated. Edmund would pretend grief while calculating how quickly he could claim what little inheritance remained, and she would become nothing more than a cautionary tale told to young ladies about the dangers of travelling without proper protection. Her left hand lost its grip. She swung sickeningly, held now by only her right hand on a protruding root that was already tearing free from the soil. Then, impossible and immediate, there was pressure on her wrist. Strong fingers. A man's hand, closing around hers with desperate firmness. "Hold on," a voice commanded from above, rough with exertion. "Don't let go," as if she had any intention of doing otherwise. Evelyn looked up and saw a man lying flat at the cliff's edge, his dark coat spread across the ground, both of his hands now gripping her arm. His face was set with concentration, jaw clenched, as he began pulling her upward with careful, steady strength. Rocks crumbled and fell away beneath her. She found a foothold, lost it, found another. His grip never wavered. Inch by agonizing inch, he hauled her towards safety. His eyes locked on hers with an intensity that anchored her more surely than his hands. When her other arm cleared the edge, he shifted his weight, one hand releasing her wrist to grab beneath her shoulder, and with a final effort that left them both gasping, he pulled her fully onto solid ground. For a moment, neither of them moved. Evelyn lay on her stomach on the wet grass, breathing in great shuddering gulps, while the stranger knelt beside her, his hand still resting protectively on her back. "Are you injured?" His voice was cultured, controlled now that the immediate crisis had passed. Evelyn managed to turn her head. Her rescuer was perhaps in his mid-30s, with dark hair dishevelled from his exertions, and eyes of such a deep green they appeared almost black in the clouded afternoon light. His features were aristocratic, sharp-planed and handsome in an austere way that suggested he did not smile often. I don't believe so." Her own voice sounded strange to her ears. "The carriage is beyond recovery." He stood, offering her his hand with a formality that seemed absurd, given he had just saved her life. Can you stand? She could. Barely. Her legs trembled as he helped her to her feet, and when she swayed, his arm came around her waist with businesslike efficiency. Forgive the liberty, he said, though he did not release her. You've had a considerable shock. Evelyn looked past him and saw, for the first time, the black horse standing a short distance away, reins trailing. This man had been riding, had seen the accident, had dismounted and reached her in time. A few seconds later, and she would have fallen beyond any hope of rescue. You saved my life, she whispered. His expression shifted, something unreadable passing across those severe features. I happened to be nearby. Anyone would have done the same. You happened to be nearby, and you chose to risk your own life for a stranger. Evelyn straightened as much as her shaking limbs would allow, pulling away from his supporting arm despite her body's protests. I am in your debt, sir. You owe me nothing. He retrieved his hat from where it had fallen in the grass during the rescue. I am Alexander Vance, Duke of Northmere. My estate lies 20 minutes from here. You require a physician and shelter. I insist you accept both. A duke. Of course he was. Evelyn looked down at her travelling dress, now torn and filthy, at her hands scraped raw from clinging to stone. She must appear thoroughly disreputable. I am Lady Evelyn Marlowe, she managed, and I accept your kind offer, Your Grace. I seem to have little alternative. Indeed. His gaze moved to the cliff edge, where the carriage had finally surrendered to gravity and plunged into the sea below. Your driver? Fled the moment the wheel broke. I suspect he had been drinking. Something dark flashed across the Duke's face. I see. Come, Lady Evelyn. You're beginning to tremble in earnest, and shock can be as dangerous as injury. He led her to his horse with surprising gentleness, lifting her into the saddle before mounting behind her. Evelyn found herself cradled against his chest, his arms creating a cage of safety as he guided the animal toward the inland road. My baggage, she said suddenly. Everything I own was in that carriage. If anything survived the fall, I will have men retrieve it. His voice rumbled through his chest against her back. For now, concern yourself only with staying conscious. Northmere Hall is not far. The ride passed in a blur of grey sky and darkening landscape. Evelyn was vaguely aware of gates opening, of gravel crunching beneath hooves, of voices raised in alarm. Then there were hands helping her down, and the Duke's voice cutting through the confusion with crisp authority. Send for Dr. Monroe immediately. Prepare the blue guest chamber, and someone ride to the village. Inquire if wreckage has washed ashore from a carriage. There may be luggage worth salvaging. A woman's face appeared before Evelyn, lined with concern and competent authority. Come along, my lady. Let's get you warm and dry. The last thing Evelyn saw before darkness claimed her was Alexander Vance standing in the courtyard, watching her carried inside with an expression she could not name. Consciousness returned slowly, accompanied by the scent of lavender and beeswax. Evelyn opened her eyes to find herself in a chamber of understated elegance, far grander than anything she had occupied in years. Pale blue damask covered the walls, and morning light filtered through tall windows overlooking manicured gardens. For a disorienting moment, she could not remember where she was or how she had arrived. Then memory flooded back. The carriage, the cliff, the fall that had not quite been, and the dark-haired stranger who had pulled her from the edge of death. A soft knock preceded the entrance of a middle-aged woman in a housekeeper's black dress. Her expression one of professional concern. Ah, you're awake at last, my lady. I'm Mrs. Blackwell, housekeeper of Northmere Hall. How are you feeling? Remarkably well, considering. Evelyn attempted to sit up and discovered that someone had dressed her in a borrowed nightgown of fine linen. I seem to have lost an entire day. Day and night both, my lady. Dr. Monroe said the shock would take its toll. You've been sleeping since yesterday afternoon. Mrs. Blackwell poured water from a porcelain pitcher into a glass and brought it to her. His Grace has been most concerned. He's asked to be informed the moment you woke. The water was cool and welcome. Evelyn drained the glass before speaking again. My things. Some items were recovered from the wreckage. Not much, I'm afraid. The sea took most of it. The housekeeper's expression softened with sympathy. His Grace has sent messages to Bath and London, informing your family of your safety and present location. Bath. Her aunt would be beside herself with worry. And Edmund. Evelyn's stomach tightened. Edmund had arranged this journey, had insisted upon the particular carriage company, had been so eager to see her on her way to London. I should like to rise and dress if possible. Of course, my lady. I've taken the liberty of having some garments altered for you. They belong to the late Duchess. His Grace thought you might prefer something suitable until proper arrangements can be made. The late Duchess. Evelyn had heard gossip of the Duke of Northmere's wife dying some years past, though the details escaped her. She accepted the offer with gratitude, and within the hour found herself dressed in a morning gown of soft grey muslin that had been hastily adjusted to fit her smaller frame. Mrs. Blackwell led her through corridors that spoke of old wealth, tastefully displayed. The house possessed an air of masculine restraint, beautiful, but not ostentatious. They arrived at a breakfast room where the Duke stood by the window, reading correspondence. He turned at their entrance. Lady Evelyn. He set aside his papers immediately. I am glad to see you recovered. Please sit. Have you appetite for breakfast? Some, Your Grace. She took the indicated chair as he pulled it out for her. A gesture of courtesy that seemed natural rather than calculated. I will have a tray brought. Mrs. Blackwell disappeared, leaving them alone. The Duke resumed his own seat across the table, studying her with an intensity that made Evelyn acutely aware of her borrowed dress and hastily arranged hair. Dr. Munro assures me you suffered no lasting harm. A few bruises, scraped hands, but nothing requiring extended care. Thanks entirely to your intervention. She met his gaze directly. I have not properly thanked you, Your Grace. You saved my life at considerable risk to your own. The risk was minimal. I could not have lived with myself had I stood by and done nothing. He poured tea from a pot at his elbow, passing her a cup with movements that suggested long habit. I have taken the liberty of sending word to Bath and London regarding your circumstances. Your aunt, Lady Henrietta Carlisle, I believe? Yes, she will be terribly worried. I assured her of your safety and invited her to join us here while you recuperate. I also contacted Lord Edmund Carlisle, who I understand arranged your journey. Something in his tone suggested more than simple courtesy. Evelyn wrapped her hands around the teacup, seeking its warmth. Edmund is my cousin. He inherited the family title and properties after my father died. I see. The Duke's expression remained neutral, but his eyes were watchful. Forgive me if this seems presumptuous, but I must ask about your circumstances. You were travelling alone, in an inferior carriage, with an intoxicated driver. This strikes me as unusual for a lady of quality. Heat rose to Evelyn's cheeks. My circumstances are not what they once were, Your Grace. My parents died 5 years ago. The estate was entailed to Edmund. I live with my aunt on a modest income. When Edmund offered to arrange my transport to London for the season, I accepted gratefully. Economy was necessary. Economy does not require recklessness. His voice hardened slightly. That carriage was a death trap, and the driver should never have been allowed to handle a vehicle. Before Evelyn could respond, Mrs. Blackwell returned with a breakfast tray laden with eggs, toast, preserves, and fruit. The interruption allowed her to collect her thoughts while the housekeeper arranged the dishes. When they were alone again, the Duke spoke more gently. I do not mean to pry into your affairs, Lady Evelyn. However, I have some experience with matters of estate management and family obligations. If you would permit me to understand your situation more fully, I may be able to offer advice or assistance. Evelyn hesitated, spreading jam on her toast to avoid his penetrating gaze. But something in his manner, direct yet not unkind, invited confidence. My father was Viscount Marlowe. When he and my mother died in a house fire, Edmund inherited everything as the nearest male relation. The properties were heavily mortgaged, the accounts in disorder. Edmund has struggled with the responsibilities. And you? I had a small inheritance from my maternal grandmother, held in trust until I marry or reach the age of 30. £15,000. It is not a fortune, but it would provide independence. She took a small bite of toast. Edmund has been rather insistent that I marry. Soon. To him, perhaps. The bluntness of the question startled her into looking up. The Duke's expression remained carefully neutral, but something in his eyes suggested he had already formed conclusions. He has suggested as much, several times. And you have refused. I have. Evelyn set down her toast, appetite fading. Your Grace, I do not know why I am telling you this. You have been extraordinarily kind, but my family troubles are not your concern. They became my concern the moment I pulled you from that cliff. He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. Lady Evelyn, I must tell you something that may distress you. I have had the wreckage of your carriage examined. The wheel that broke had been deliberately compromised. Someone sawed partway through the axle. The room seemed to tilt. Evelyn gripped the edge of the table. You cannot mean... I mean that your accident was no accident at all. Someone intended for that carriage to fail on a dangerous stretch of road. His voice remained calm, but steel ran beneath it. The question is whether you were the intended victim, or merely unfortunate collateral. Evelyn's mind raced. Edmund had arranged the carriage, had insisted upon that particular route, had been so eager for her departure. But surely he would not, could not. I can see you are thinking of your cousin. The Duke rose and moved to the sideboard, pouring himself coffee. I do not make accusations lightly, Lady Evelyn, but I have sent for a man who conducts investigations on my behalf. Mr. Thomas Wexford is discreet and thorough. With your permission, I would have him look into the matter. Why? The word burst from her. Why would you go to such lengths for a stranger? He turned to face her, coffee cup in hand. Because attempted murder on my lands is a matter I take seriously. Because you are a gentlewoman in distress, far from family and protection. And because, he paused, something flickering in those dark green eyes. Because I find I cannot easily forget the feeling of your hand in mine as I pulled you to safety. You trusted me with your life in that moment. Allow me to be worthy of that trust now. The intimacy of the admission hung between them. Evelyn felt her pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with fear. This man, this austere Duke, with his careful manners and hidden depths, was offering her something no one had in 5 long years. Genuine protection, freely given. I do not know what to say. Say yes. He returned to the table, setting down his cup with quiet finality. Allow me to investigate this properly. In the meantime, you will remain here as my guest until we determine whether you are truly safe. Your aunt is welcome as well. I will not see you return to a situation that may prove dangerous. Edmund will expect me in London. Edmund may expect what he wishes. He will not have you until I am satisfied you face no further threat. The authoritative tone should have rankled. Instead, Evelyn found it oddly reassuring. For so long she had managed alone, making do, accepting scraps of charity, and calling it security. Here was a man offering real protection, backed by wealth and power she could never hope to claim herself. Then I accept your grace. With gratitude. Alexander. The word was quiet. If we are to be housemates, even temporarily, perhaps we might dispense with excessive formality. In private, at least. Alexander, she repeated, tasting his name. Then you must call me Evelyn. Evelyn! The way he said it, with that precise diction and hint of warmth, made her name sound almost beautiful. Tell me, do you ride? I find the morning air clears the mind, and the grounds here are extensive. I have not ridden in years. My aunt keeps no horses. Then we must remedy that. Tomorrow, if you feel strong enough, I will introduce you to a mare of gentle temperament. She will suit you, I think. They spoke for another hour, conversation ranging from books to philosophy to the management of estates. Evelyn found herself relaxing in ways she had not thought possible with a man of his status. He listened when she spoke, asked for her opinions on matters of genuine substance, and treated her observations with respect rather than condescension. When Mrs. Blackwell appeared to announce the arrival of Mr. Wexford, Alexander rose with obvious reluctance. I must attend to this. Perhaps you would care to explore the library. Mrs. Blackwell can show you the way. I believe you will find the collection worthwhile. I would enjoy that very much. As she followed the housekeeper from the breakfast room, Evelyn glanced back to see Alexander already deep in conversation with a grey-haired man who had the bearing of a former military officer. Whatever they discussed, it was conducted in tones too low for her to hear. The library proved everything he had promised. 2 stories of books, with a spiral stair leading to a gallery above. Evelyn lost herself among the shelves, pulling down volumes on history and poetry, settling into a window seat with a collection of Wordsworth. She had been reading for perhaps an hour when Alexander found her there. "I see you have discovered my weakness." He smiled, a rare expression that transformed his severe features into something approaching warmth. "I have been collecting books since I was a boy. They were better company than most people I encountered. It must have been lonely." It was. But it taught me to be self-sufficient, and it gave me an appreciation for true conversation when I finally found it. He moved to stand by her window looking out over the garden. "Wexford has confirmed my suspicions. The axle was deliberately sawed, and the carriage was contracted through a company known for taking bribes to overlook safety matters. Edmund," her voice was hollow. "The trail leads to him, yes, though proving intent will be difficult without further evidence." He turned back to her. "Evelyn, I must ask you directly. Why would your cousin wish you harm? The inheritance? Possibly. He has debts, I know. Large ones. If I married him, he would gain control of my trust." She set aside the book, hands trembling slightly. "But surely he would not attempt murder merely for £15,000. Men have killed for far less. And if his debts are as substantial as you suggest, 15,000 might seem salvation." Alexander's expression darkened. "But there is another possibility. If you died unmarried before reaching 30, what becomes of the inheritance? It would revert to the estate, to Edmund." "Precisely. Marriage gives him control. Your death gives him ownership." He crossed to her, kneeling beside the window seat so their eyes were level. "I will not let him touch you. You have my word on that." The intensity of his gaze, the protective fury barely leashed beneath his control, stole her breath. "Why do you care so much? You barely know me." "I know enough." His hand covered hers where it lay on the windowsill. "I know you manage your aunt's affairs with skill that would shame many estate agents. I know you read Wordsworth and have opinions on crop rotation. I know you faced death with remarkable courage and thanked your rescuer before thinking of yourself. That is enough." The arrival of Lady Henrietta Carlisle, accompanied by Lord Edmund Carlisle, occurred 5 days after the accident. Evelyn watched from the drawing-room window as their carriage rolled up the drive, her stomach knotting with a complex mixture of relief and dread. She had missed her aunt terribly, but Edmund's presence cast a shadow over any reunion. "They have arrived," she said quietly. Alexander, who had been reviewing correspondence at his desk, set aside his papers and joined her at the window. His presence at her shoulder was both reassuring and disturbingly distracting. In the days since she had awakened at Northmere Hall, they had fallen into an easy companionship that felt simultaneously natural and dangerous. Evelyn was becoming far too comfortable in the Duke's company, far too aware of the way his rare smiles transformed his austere features, far too affected by the sound of his voice in the morning when they rode together through the grounds. "Your aunt appears agitated," Alexander observed. Indeed, Lady Henrietta practically tumbled from the carriage, her grey travelling dress askew, her bonnet ribbons untied. Edmund descended with more dignity, his reddish hair catching the afternoon sun, his face flushed in a way that suggested either exertion or drink, possibly both. Mrs. Blackwell ushered them into the drawing-room moments later. Henrietta rushed immediately to Evelyn, embracing her with such force that they nearly toppled. "Oh, my dear child, when we received the Duke's message, I thought I should perish from worry. A carriage accident, you hanging from a cliff. It is too terrible to contemplate." She pulled back, examining Evelyn's face with anxious eyes. "You are truly well? Not injured?" "Truly well, Aunt, thanks to His Grace's timely intervention." Henrietta turned to Alexander, who had remained standing near the fireplace, and executed a curtsy that would have been more graceful had she not been trembling. "Your Grace, I cannot express my gratitude. To have saved my niece's life, to have offered her such generous hospitality, you are goodness itself." "Lady Henrietta," Alexander bowed with courtly precision, "I am pleased to welcome you to Northmere Hall. Lady Evelyn has been an exemplary guest. I hope you will find your accommodations comfortable." "Oh, I am certain I shall." though we do not wish to impose upon your hospitality longer than necessary. Edmund has arranged lodgings for us in London, and we should be on our way within the day." "Within the day?" Evelyn's voice came out sharper than intended. "Aunt Henrietta, surely you are tired from your journey, and I am not certain I am prepared to travel again so soon." Edmund spoke for the first time, his voice carrying a note of false concern. "Prima, I understand your reluctance, but the accommodations in London are already secured. Moreover, the season has begun, and you would not wish to miss the opportunities I have arranged on your behalf." "Opportunities?" Alexander's tone was mild, but something in it made Edmund shift his weight. "Introductions, social engagements. My cousin's situation requires that she make an advantageous match. Time is not on her side." Edmund's gaze flickered dismissively over Evelyn. "At 9 and 20, every season counts." The casual cruelty of the observation hung in the air. Henrietta made a small, distressed sound, but Edmund seemed oblivious to his tactlessness. "Lord Carlisle," Alexander said, moving away from the fireplace with deliberate slowness. "I wonder if I might have a word with you in private. There are matters regarding Lady Evelyn's accident that require discussion." Edmund's flush deepened. "I am certain there is nothing that cannot be discussed before my aunt and cousin. Nevertheless, I insist." The steel beneath Alexander's courtesy was unmistakable. "If you would accompany me to my study." The two men departed, leaving Evelyn alone with her aunt. Henrietta immediately grasped both of Evelyn's hands, her expression anxious. "Dearest, you must tell me everything. The Duke's message was so brief. A carriage accident on the coastal road, and you rescued from certain death. But how did it happen? Was the driver at fault?" "The driver was drunk," Evelyn said carefully, "and the carriage itself was poorly maintained. The wheel broke on a dangerous curve." "How dreadful." "Edmund assured me he had arranged for a reputable company." Henrietta's brow furrowed. "He was most insistent about organizing your journey himself, said it would be more economical than allowing me to make the arrangements. He mentioned the carriage specifically." "Oh yes. He visited me in Bath the week before your departure. So thoughtful of him to concern himself with such details." Henrietta released Evelyn's hands and moved to the window, gazing out at the manicured gardens. "Though I confess, I have been worried about Edmund of late. He seems strained, and some of his associates are not gentlemen I would wish to know." "What sort of associates?" "I cannot say precisely. But there was a man who called at my house last month, looking for Edmund. Quite rough in manner, despite his fine coat. He made certain implications about debts owed." Henrietta turned back to Evelyn, her soft face troubled. "I fear Edmund has been gambling again. He promised after your father's death that he would reform, but—" The door opened before Evelyn could respond. Alexander entered alone, his expression carefully controlled, but his eyes hard as flint. Edmund did not accompany him. "Lady Henrietta, would you be so kind as to allow me a moment alone with Lady Evelyn? I assure you, all propriety shall be observed. Mrs. Blackwell will remain just outside the door." Henrietta looked between them uncertainly, but the Duke's authority was not easily questioned. She departed with a final worried glance at her niece. When they were alone, Alexander crossed to Evelyn, taking her hands in his. The gesture was both protective and possessive, sending heat through her despite the gravity of his expression. "Your cousin has left for London. I made it clear that his presence at Northmere Hall was not welcome." "What did you say to him?" "I informed him that I had evidence suggesting the carriage accident was the result of deliberate sabotage. I told him that I intended to pursue a full investigation and would involve the magistrate if necessary." Alexander's jaw tightened. His reaction confirmed every suspicion. He blustered, made vague threats about my reputation, and ultimately fled when I suggested we might discuss the matter with local authorities immediately. Evelyn sank into the nearest chair, her legs suddenly unsteady. "Then it is true. Edmund truly meant for me to die, or to be injured severely enough that you would be dependent upon him for care." Alexander knelt before her, maintaining his hold on her hands. "Evelyn, I need you to understand how serious this is. Your cousin is desperate, dangerous, and now cornered. He knows I suspect him. That makes him unpredictable. What can I do? Remain here. You and your aunt both. I have already suggested to Lady Henrietta that she might find the guest cottage on the estate more comfortable than returning to Bath. The accommodations are modest but sufficient, and she would have her own household while remaining close enough for daily visits. You would do that? Establish my aunt in her own residence simply to keep her safe? I would do considerably more than that if necessary. His thumbs moved in small circles over her knuckles, a gesture that seemed unconscious. In fact, I have a proposal to make, though the timing is far from ideal. Before he could continue, the drawing-room door burst open. A young woman swept in, resplendent in a walking dress of deep violet that proclaimed both wealth and impeccable taste. Her black hair was arranged in the latest fashion, and her fine features bore an expression of pleasant expectation that faltered when she saw Alexander kneeling before Evelyn. "Alexander! I had heard you were in residence and simply had to call. I hope I am not—" Her dark eyes moved from the Duke to Evelyn, assessment both swift and cutting. Interrupting, Alexander rose smoothly, though Evelyn noted he positioned himself slightly between her and the newcomer. "Lady Philippa, this is unexpected. Is it? I am staying with the Harrington family just 5 miles hence. When I learned you had returned to Northmere, I thought it only natural to pay my respects." Lady Philippa's smile held calculation. "You know how the countryside craves society. Allow me to introduce Lady Evelyn Marlowe. She is currently my guest, recovering from a serious accident." Alexander's tone was carefully neutral, but Evelyn caught the warning beneath it. "Lady Evelyn." Philippa executed a curtsy so precisely correct it bordered on insult. "How dreadful. I hope your injuries were not severe." "Merely bruises, thank you." "How fortunate. And how kind of Alexander to provide refuge." Philippa moved closer to the Duke, her fan snapping open with a sound like a gunshot. "Though I confess surprised to find you entertaining a lady alone. One might almost think the proprieties had been forgotten." "My aunt is in residence," Evelyn said evenly, "as is the Duke's entire household staff. I assure you, Lady Philippa, there is nothing improper about the arrangements." "Of course not." The smile never wavered, though one does hear such interesting gossip. A lady travelling alone, a dramatic rescue, an extended stay at the home of England's most eligible bachelor. The ton will find it all quite fascinating when you reach London. The threat was delicately delivered, but unmistakable. Alexander's expression hardened. "I am certain society will find more pressing matters to occupy their attention. Lady Evelyn's misfortune and my assistance in her recovery are hardly scandalous." Naturally, Philippa closed her fan with practiced elegance. "Still, appearances matter so very much, do they not? Especially for a lady of uncertain prospects. One would hate for innocent circumstances to be misconstrued." "Lady Philippa," Alexander said, his voice dropping to a temperature that would freeze stone, "I believe you have urgent business elsewhere. Allow me to escort you to your carriage." "But I have only just arrived, and now you are departing." He offered his arm with courtesy that was entirely devoid of warmth. "I insist." Philippa had no choice but to accept, though her smile had acquired a brittle edge. "How masterful you are, Your Grace. One might almost think you wish to be rid of me. We shall speak again soon, I am certain." When Alexander returned 15 minutes later, his temper was evident in the set of his shoulders, despite his composed features. He found Evelyn still in the drawing-room, staring into the fire. "I apologize for Lady Philippa's intrusion. She has been persistent in her attentions for some time. She is beautiful. She is calculating." Alexander moved to stand beside Evelyn's chair. "And she has just demonstrated that your presence here, however innocent, will be used against you in society. Edmund's abandonment was craven, but Philippa's threat was in some ways worse. She will spread rumours designed to damage your reputation. Then perhaps I should leave after all." "No," the word was forceful. "That would only confirm her insinuations. There is, however, another solution." He paused, and Evelyn saw uncertainty cross his face for the first time since she had known him. One that I had hoped to propose under more romantic circumstances, but events have forced my hand. He knelt again, this time with clear purpose. Evelyn, I realize we have known each other only days. I realize that what I am about to suggest may seem precipitous, but I find that I cannot bear the thought of you facing society's cruelty alone, nor can I tolerate the idea of Edmund having any claim over your future. Her heart began to race. Alexander, what are you saying? I am saying that I would be honored if you would consent to become my wife. The word hung between them, suspended in the drawing room's still air. Evelyn stared at Alexander, her heart, a wild thing, beating against her ribs. Marriage. He was proposing marriage. I know this is sudden, Alexander continued, still kneeling before her, his green eyes searching her face. I know you may believe this is merely about protecting your reputation or thwarting Edmund's schemes, but I must be honest with you, Evelyn. In the days since I pulled you from that cliff, I have come to care for you in ways I did not anticipate. You challenge me, interest me, make me laugh. The thought of you returning to Edmund's influence, of society tearing your reputation to shreds because you were unfortunate enough to need my help, it is intolerable. Alexander, I cannot allow you to sacrifice yourself for my sake. Marriage is forever. You speak of caring, but care is not love. You would come to resent me, this woman you were forced to wed to preserve her honor. Forced? He rose, pulling her to her feet with gentle insistence. No one forces me to do anything, Evelyn. I am proposing because I want you as my wife. I am proposing because the alternative, letting you go, has become unthinkable. But I will not deceive you about the terms. I know you dreamed of a love match. I cannot promise you love, at least not yet. What I can offer is protection, respect, partnership, a marriage of minds, if not yet of hearts. Is that so terrible a foundation? Evelyn pulled her hands free, moving to the window to collect her scattered thoughts. Beyond the glass, the gardens of Northmere stretched in ordered beauty. Everything about Alexander's world spoke of control, careful planning, rational decisions. Marriage as a business arrangement would fit seamlessly into that world. But she was not made for such cold pragmatism. You offer me everything except the one thing I have wanted since I was a girl, she said quietly. A husband who loves me. Not for my fortune, which is paltry, nor for my connections, which are negligible, but for myself. And you believe I do not? There was something raw in his voice that made her turn. Evelyn, I am not a man given to romantic declarations. My first marriage taught me the danger of passion without substance. But what I feel for you is real, even if I cannot dress it in poetry. Give me time, and I believe that care could deepen into something more, or it could remain precisely what it is now. Affection born of circumstance and obligation. Then we are at an impasse. Alexander's expression shuttered, that careful mask of ducal dignity sliding back into place. I will not force you. But neither can I, in good conscience, allow you to face Edmund and society's gossip without protection. If you will not accept my hand in marriage, then at least accept my continued hospitality until we can devise another solution. Before Evelyn could respond, the drawing room door opened with enough force to make them both turn. Edmund stood in the doorway, his face flushed crimson, a letter crumpled in his fist. Behind him, Mrs. Blackwell hovered anxiously, clearly having failed to prevent his entry. So this is your solution? Edmund spat, advancing into the room. Seduction and manipulation. I thought better of you, Northmere, but it seems even dukes will stoop to anything for entertainment. Lord Carlisle, Alexander said, his voice dropping to a temperature that could freeze water. You were asked to leave this house. I suggest you depart immediately before I have you forcibly removed. Oh, I shall leave. But not before I ensure my cousin understands exactly what she is throwing away by refusing my suit in favor of your hollow promises. Edmund turned his bleary gaze on Evelyn. You think he wants you for yourself? You, with your shabby dresses and pitiful dowry. He wants a convenient wife, nothing more. Someone biddable and grateful who will not interfere with his real pursuits. Edmund, you are drunk, Evelyn said, fighting to keep her voice steady. Whatever grievances you have, this is neither the time nor the place. Is it not? Then pray tell, dear cousin, when would be appropriate? After you have married him and discovered the truth? After he has claimed your pathetic inheritance and cast you aside? Edmund's laugh was ugly. At least with me, you would know where you stood. I have never pretended affection I do not feel. You have made your position abundantly clear, Alexander said, moving to place himself between Edmund and Evelyn. You view Lady Evelyn as nothing more than a means to pay your gambling debts. That is not marriage, Lord Carlisle. That is prostitution. Edmund's face went from red to purple. How dare you? I am offering her security, a home, the protection of my name. You are offering her a prison sentence with a man who attempted to murder her. Alexander's voice was deadly quiet. Yes, attempted murder. I have proof that you sabotaged that carriage, paid the driver to take a specific route, and arranged for the vehicle to fail at the most dangerous point on the coastal road. The only question remaining is whether you meant to kill Lady Evelyn outright, or merely injure her severely enough that she would be dependent upon your so-called protection. The silence that followed was absolute. Evelyn felt the blood drain from her face as she stared at Edmund, waiting for him to deny the accusations. But no denial came. Instead, Edmund's expression shifted through shock, calculation, and finally settled on something approaching desperation. You cannot prove any of that. I can. I have the testimony of the driver, currently residing in the local magistrate's custody. I have documentation of your substantial debts to a London moneylender named Josiah Crowe, and I have evidence that you attempted to bribe the carriage company to overlook certain safety concerns. Alexander's eyes were merciless. You are finished, Carlyle. The only question is whether you depart quietly or whether I involve the authorities immediately. Edmund's hands clenched into fists at his sides. For a moment, Evelyn feared he might attempt violence, but then his shoulders sagged, the fight draining from him as quickly as it had appeared. It was not supposed to end this way, he muttered. The carriage was meant to break down. Nothing more. Strand her somewhere I could reach her first, demonstrate her need for my protection. The cliff road was selected for its isolation, not its danger. I never meant for her to nearly die, but you were prepared to accept that outcome if it occurred. Alexander's disgust was palpable. Leave, now, and if you value your freedom, you will not attempt to contact Lady Evelyn again, nor will you speak of this matter to anyone. Or what? You will have me arrested. Do you think society will believe a duke's word over a viscount's? Edmund attempted bravado, but it rang hollow. I think society will believe the evidence I present. More to the point, I think Mr. Crowe will be very interested to learn that his debtor is facing criminal charges. Men like Crowe have their own methods of collecting what is owed. Alexander moved to the bell pull, summoning servants. My footmen will escort you from the premises. Do not return. Edmund cast one last venomous look at Evelyn before allowing himself to be led away. The moment the door closed behind him, Evelyn's knees buckled. Alexander caught her, guiding her to a chair with gentle hands that contrasted sharply with the steel he had just displayed. I am sorry you had to hear that, he said quietly. He admitted it. He actually admitted to sabotaging the carriage. Evelyn's voice shook. I knew, intellectually, that he must have been responsible. But hearing him say it makes it real. Alexander knelt before her once more, taking her cold hands in his warm ones. Evelyn, I need you to understand something. Edmund is dangerous, but he is also cornered. Desperate men are unpredictable. His debts will not disappear simply because I have driven him from Northmere. He will seek other means to access your inheritance. He cannot touch it if I do not marry. Not directly, but he could attempt to have you declared mentally incompetent, claim guardianship over you as your nearest male relation. With the right physician willing to testify, with sufficient pressure applied to your aunt, he might succeed. Alexander's grip on her hands tightened. Or he might simply try again to arrange another accident, this time ensuring there is no rescue. The pragmatic assessment sent ice through her veins. What would you have me do? Marry me. His voice was steady, certain. Not as a business arrangement. though it would serve that purpose. Not merely for protection, though you need it. Marry me because in the days we have spent together, I have come to believe we could build something genuine, a partnership based on respect and growing affection. Is that not worth the risk? Evelyn searched his face, looking for traces of deception or self-interest. She found only earnest determination and something else, something warmer that he seemed almost afraid to name. You said you could not promise love. I said not yet. But Evelyn, what I feel for you already exceeds anything I felt for my first wife, despite courting her for an entire season. If this is not the beginning of love, then I do not know what is. The confession, wrung from a man clearly unaccustomed to such vulnerability, undid her remaining resistance. Perhaps it was foolish to trust him. Perhaps she would come to regret this decision. But the alternative, returning to a life of fear and dependence, was no longer tolerable. Very well, she whispered. I will marry you, Alexander. Though I warn you, if you come to regret this offer, I will not release you from it easily. The smile that broke across his face transformed him entirely, revealing the man behind the ducal reserve. I have no intention of regretting it, nor will I give you cause to do so. He raised her hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that sent warmth flooding through her. We will marry by special license. 3 days, no more. That will give us time to inform your aunt, secure the necessary documents, and ensure that when Edmund learns of our union, it will be fait accompli. 3 days. The reality of it struck her. In 3 days, she would be the Duchess of Northmere, bound to this complicated, compelling man for the rest of her life. Unless you wish to wait longer. No. She surprised herself with the firmness of her answer. 3 days is sufficient. If we are to do this, let it be done quickly, before either of us has time to reconsider. The chapel at Northmere Hall had stood for 200 years, its stone walls bearing witness to generations of Vance family christenings, marriages, and funerals. On a grey morning 3 days after Alexander's proposal, it served as the setting for the quietest ducal wedding Northumberland had likely ever seen. Evelyn stood before the small mirror in the guest chamber, examining her reflection with something approaching disbelief. The gown she wore had belonged to Alexander's late mother, altered hastily by the estate seamstress to fit her smaller frame. Pale ivory silk with delicate lace at the sleeves and neckline, it was far grander than anything she had ever owned. Yet it felt wrong somehow, borrowed elegance for a marriage born of necessity rather than romance. You look beautiful, dearest. Lady Henrietta fussed with the veil, her eyes damp with tears that threatened to spill at any moment. Your mother would have been so proud. Would she? Evelyn's voice was hollow. I am marrying a man I have known less than a fortnight. A duke who is offering me protection rather than love. This is not what she would have wanted for me. Your mother would have wanted you safe and secure. Henrietta's hands stilled on the veil, and when she met Evelyn's eyes in the mirror, her expression was surprisingly firm. She would have wanted you away from Edmund's schemes, and she would have recognized, as I do, that the Duke cares for you far more than he admits, even to himself. You barely know him. I know he has gone to considerable lengths to protect you. I know he looks at you when you are not watching with an expression I have not seen on his face in all our other interactions. And I know that when you are together, you seem more yourself than you have in years. Henrietta squeezed Evelyn's shoulders gently. Give it time, my dear. Give him time. Men of his station are not taught to speak of their feelings. But that does not mean the feelings do not exist. A knock at the door preceded Mrs. Blackwell's entrance. It is time, my lady. His Grace awaits. The walk to the chapel felt both endless and too brief. Evelyn's heart hammered against her ribs as they approached the ancient doors, open to reveal candlelight flickering within. No guests filled the pews, only the bare minimum required by law. The clergyman, Alexander, and 2 witnesses from the household staff. This was marriage reduced to its essential elements, stripped of all ceremony and spectacle. Alexander turned as she entered, and something in his face made her steps falter. He wore formal black, austere and elegant, but it was his expression that caught her. Not the careful ducal mask she had grown accustomed to, but something raw and uncertain that made him seem suddenly younger, more vulnerable. He met her at the altar, offering his arm with a formality that seemed absurd, given they were about to pledge their lives to each other. The vicar, an elderly man who had christened Alexander as an infant, opened his prayer book and began the ancient words. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here in the sight of God." Evelyn heard the service as if from a great distance. She made her responses when required, her voice sounding strange to her own ears. Beside her, Alexander's responses were steady, certain, each word carrying the weight of binding promise. "I, Alexander James Vance, take thee, Evelyn Margaret Marlowe, to be my wedded wife." His hands were warm around hers, strong and steady. She found herself focusing on that contact, the solid reality of his presence, as the ceremony progressed with inexorable momentum toward its conclusion. "I, Evelyn Margaret Marlowe, take thee, Alexander James Vance, to be my wedded husband." The words felt enormous, world-altering. In speaking them, she was surrendering the last vestiges of the life she had known, stepping into an unknown future bound to this complicated man who looked at her now with such focused intensity. The ring Alexander slipped onto her finger was old, the gold worn smooth by time. "It belonged to my grandmother," he whispered. "She was known for her sharp mind and sharper tongue. I think she would have liked you." The small confidence, offered in the midst of the solemn ceremony, steadied her. This was Alexander beneath the ducal reserve, a man who valued intelligence and spirit enough to honor his grandmother's memory by giving Evelyn her ring. "I now pronounce you man and wife." Just like that, it was done. She was Evelyn Vance, Duchess of Northmere, bound to Alexander until death parted them. The enormity of it threatened to overwhelm her until Alexander's hand found the small of her back, a steadying touch that anchored her to the present moment. They signed the register in the vestry, Henrietta and Mrs. Blackwell adding their signatures as witnesses. The scratching of the pen seemed unnaturally loud in the small space, each stroke making the marriage more real, more irrevocable. "Congratulations, Your Grace," Mrs. Blackwell said to Evelyn, the title sounding foreign. "May I be the first to wish you every happiness." The small wedding breakfast that followed felt surreal. They sat in the morning room, Alexander at the head of the table and Evelyn beside him. Picking at food neither seemed to want, while Henrietta made valiant attempts at cheerful conversation. "I shall be perfectly comfortable in the cottage," Henrietta was saying. "Mrs. Blackwell has been kindness itself in arranging everything, and it will be pleasant to have my own household again, however modest." "You are welcome to remain in the main house," Alexander offered. "There is certainly room enough." "Oh no, I could not impose. You and Evelyn must have your privacy." Henrietta's cheeks coloured slightly. "Besides, I have already become quite attached to the cottage. It is charming, truly." The mention of privacy sent heat creeping up Evelyn's neck. They had not discussed the practical arrangements of their marriage beyond the ceremony itself. Would Alexander expect to share her chambers tonight? The thought filled her with a confusing mixture of anxiety and something that might have been anticipation. "If you will excuse me," she said abruptly, setting down her napkin, "I find I have developed a headache. I believe I shall rest for a while." She fled before anyone could respond, making her way to the guest chamber that had been hers for the past week. But when she opened the door, she found her belongings gone, the room stripped of all signs of her occupation. "Your things have been moved to the Duchess's chambers, my lady." Phillips, her newly assigned lady's maid, appeared at her elbow. "If you will follow me." The Duchess's chambers were in the family wing, connected to the Duke's apartments by a shared sitting room. Phillips led her through doors Evelyn had not previously explored, into a suite of rooms that took her breath away. The bedchamber was done in shades of rose and cream, elegant but warm, with tall windows overlooking the gardens. Her few belongings looked lost in the enormous space, swallowed by the grandeur of their surroundings. "Shall I help you change, Your Grace?" Phillips asked. "His Grace mentioned you were feeling unwell." "Yes, thank you." Evelyn allowed herself to be undressed and redressed in a simple day gown, her hair released from its elaborate wedding arrangement. When Phillips finally left her alone, she sank into the window seat, pressing her forehead against the cool glass. What had she done? She had married a duke she barely knew, bound herself to him forever based on less than 2 weeks' acquaintance. Yes, she was attracted to him. Yes, she enjoyed his company. But was that enough foundation for a lifetime together? A soft knock preceded Alexander's entrance through the connecting sitting room. He had changed from his wedding attire into more casual clothing, though he still moved with that unconscious authority that marked him as aristocracy. "May I come in? It is your house. Your room, technically. It is your room now." He crossed to the window seat but did not sit, standing instead with his hands clasped behind his back. "Evelyn, I know this has all happened very quickly. I know you must have doubts." "Do you?" "Of course." He finally met her eyes. "I am not insensible to the strangeness of our situation. We are married, yet we remain in many ways strangers to each other. That will take time to remedy." "How much time?" The question came out sharper than she intended. "As much as you need." He moved to the door connecting their chambers, pausing with his hand on the frame. "These are your rooms, Evelyn. Private, inviolate. I will not enter without invitation. Our marriage may have been hurried, but I will not force intimacies you are not ready to share." The promise should have relieved her. Instead, it left her feeling strangely bereft. "And if I am never ready, then we will have a marriage of companionship rather than passion. I have had one loveless marriage already, Evelyn. I will not force another into that mold simply to satisfy society's expectations of what a marriage should be." He was giving her everything she claimed to want: respect, patience, freedom. Yet somehow it felt like rejection, as though he was relieved to have an excuse to maintain distance between them. "Alexander," she began, then stopped, uncertain what she wanted to say. "Yes? Thank you. For your consideration." Something flickered in his eyes, gone too quickly to identify. "Of course, I will leave you to rest. Mrs. Blackwell will arrange for dinner to be sent up if you prefer not to come down." He departed, closing the connecting door with careful quietness. Evelyn remained at the window, watching the afternoon light fade from the gardens, feeling more alone than she had in years. The following weeks established a pattern that was both comfortable and profoundly unsatisfying. They took meals together, rode out most mornings, spent evenings in the library discussing books and estate matters. Alexander was unfailingly courteous, treating her with a respect that never quite crossed into intimacy. They inhabited the same house, bore the same name, sat across from each other at breakfast, yet remained separated by an invisible barrier neither seemed capable of breaching. Evelyn threw herself into learning the duties of a duchess, working with Mrs. Blackwell to understand the vast machinery of Northmere's operation. The housekeeper proved an invaluable ally, patiently explaining the hierarchies and traditions that governed aristocratic households. "You have a gift for this, Your Grace," Mrs. Blackwell observed one afternoon as they reviewed the household accounts. His Grace's late mother struggled terribly with the complexities. "But you see patterns, anticipate needs. I had practice managing my aunt's household, though on a much smaller scale." "Perhaps, but there is more to it than that. You have a mind for strategy, for seeing how all the pieces fit together." The housekeeper's expression warmed with approval. His Grace chose well, if I may say so. The comment stayed with Evelyn long after their meeting ended. Had Alexander chosen well? Or had circumstances simply forced a choice he would not otherwise have made? She sought answers in his face during dinner that evening, searching for some sign of his true feelings beneath the ducal courtesy. But Alexander had perfected the art of pleasant inscrutability, conversing easily about nothing of consequence, while revealing nothing of his inner thoughts. "There is a matter I wish to discuss with you," he said as they lingered over wine after the meal. "I have been reviewing the estate accounts, and I noticed you have not yet accessed your quarterly allowance. Mrs. Blackwell mentioned you needed new clothing, but nothing has been ordered. I have sufficient for my needs. Evelyn," he set down his glass with careful precision, "you are the Duchess of Northmere. You will be expected to entertain, to attend functions, to represent our family in society. That requires an appropriate wardrobe. I am not criticizing your current dress, but practicality demands we address this." The gentle rebuke stung precisely because it was justified. I am unaccustomed to spending freely. My circumstances before our marriage required strict economy. Your circumstances have changed. You need not hoard resources like a miser simply because you once had to make do with little. His voice softened. I know this is an adjustment, but you must allow yourself to step into your new role, not for my sake, but for your own. I will speak with the modiste in the village tomorrow. Thank you. He rose, offering her his hand. Walk with me. The evening is pleasant, and I find I am not yet ready for sleep. They strolled through the gardens as twilight deepened into night, following gravelled paths between beds of late-blooming roses. The air carried the scent of earth and growing things, peaceful and timeless. Do you ever regret it? Evelyn asked suddenly. Our marriage. Alexander stopped walking, turning to face her fully. No, not for a moment. Do you? I do not know. The honest answer seemed to surprise them both. I am grateful for your protection. I value your company. But this, what we have, it feels incomplete somehow. Because we maintain separate chambers. Heat flooded her cheeks. Partly, but it is more than that. We are polite strangers sharing a house, Alexander. Is this truly all our marriage will be? He was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried an edge of something raw beneath its usual control. What would you have me do, Evelyn? Force myself into your bed when you made clear you wanted time. Declare feelings I am not certain how to name, simply to give you the romantic fairy tale you deserve. I am trying to be patient, to give you space to adjust. If that makes me a poor husband, then I plead guilty. I am not asking you to force anything. I am asking you to be honest with me, to tell me what you truly want from this marriage. What I want? He laughed without humour. I want you to look at me the way you did in the library that day, when I told you about my mother. I want to wake beside you and know I did not trap you into this life. I want to stop feeling like I'm walking on glass every time we are alone together, terrified that one wrong word will shatter whatever fragile connection we have built. He took a step closer, close enough that she could see the green fire in his eyes even in the dim light. I want my wife, Evelyn, not the Duchess performing her duties. You. The confession hung between them, stark and unadorned. Evelyn's heart raced as she realized what he was offering. Vulnerability for vulnerability, truth for truth. Then stop treating me like porcelain, she whispered. Stop being so endlessly patient and courteous. I do not need a perfect Duke, Alexander. I need the man who knelt before me in the drawing room and offered marriage with his heart in his eyes. His hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing across her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. That man is terrified of driving you away. Then he is a fool. She covered his hand with her own, holding it against her cheek. Because that man is the one I married, and I am tired of waiting for him to come back to me. Alexander's mouth found hers in a kiss that erased the careful distance they had maintained for weeks. It started gentle, questioning, but deepened when Evelyn responded with fervour, born of weeks of suppressed longing. His arms came around her, pulling her close against his chest, and she went willingly, finally, ready to begin building something real from the foundation of their hurried marriage. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Alexander cradled her face between his hands, their noses almost touching as he tried to catch his breath. We are quite terrible at this, you know. Most couples progress in a more logical fashion. Courtship, marriage, intimacy. We seem to be attempting it backwards. Perhaps we shall set a new fashion. Evelyn smiled against his lips. The Northmere method. Save each other's lives, marry in haste, fall in love at leisure. Fall in love, he repeated, testing the words. Is that what you think we are doing? I think we began that day on the cliff. Everything since has simply been both of us too stubborn to admit it. His answering smile transformed his face entirely. Then allow me to rectify that oversight. Evelyn Vance, I love you. Desperately, inconveniently, and entirely against my better judgment. But there it is. Joy bloomed in her chest, warm and bright. I love you too, you impossible man. They returned to the house hand in hand, and when they reached the family wing, Evelyn led him not to her chambers, but to the shared sitting room between their suites. "Stay with me tonight?" she asked. "Not in separate rooms like strangers, but truly together as husband and wife. Are you certain?" "I have never been more certain of anything." His kiss was answer enough. 6 weeks after a wedding born of necessity, their marriage finally truly began. The letter arrived on a grey October morning, delivered by a mud-splattered courier who insisted on waiting for a reply. Evelyn was in the morning room reviewing menus with Mrs. Blackwell when Alexander entered, his expression thunderous as he examined the wax seal. "What is it?" she asked, setting aside her papers. "A summons, of a sort. Edmund has apparently filed a formal complaint with the magistrate in London, claiming I coerced you into marriage through false accusations and manipulation." He broke the seal, scanning the contents with growing anger. "He is demanding an investigation into our union and suggesting it should be annulled on grounds of duress." Mrs. Blackwell made a small sound of distress. "If your grace will excuse me, I shall attend to the menus later." She departed swiftly, closing the door behind her. Evelyn rose, crossing to where Alexander stood rigid with fury. "He cannot truly believe this will succeed." "No, but he can cause us considerable embarrassment and difficulty in the attempt." Alexander passed her the letter. "Read it yourself. He has engaged a London solicitor of dubious reputation, but considerable skill in creating scandal." The letter was a masterpiece of innuendo and legal threat, suggesting, without quite accusing, that Alexander had deliberately endangered Evelyn to create a situation requiring marriage, that he had pressured a vulnerable woman into accepting his suit, and that the hasty ceremony conducted in private suggested something improper about the entire arrangement. This is madness. He is the one who sabotaged the carriage. He admitted as much before witnesses. His admission was private, given under duress according to his new narrative. He claims I threatened him physically to extract a false confession. Alexander took the letter back, crumpling it in his fist. The man is desperate, which makes him dangerous. His debts have not disappeared, simply because you are beyond his reach. This is his attempt to either force my hand into paying him to withdraw the complaint, or to create enough scandal that your trust funds become contested property. My inheritance cannot revert to him now that we are married. Not legally. But if he can cast sufficient doubt on the validity of our marriage, if he can create the impression that it was conducted under false pretenses, he might convince a court to freeze your assets pending investigation. Alexander moved to the window, staring out at the gardens with unseeing eyes. More pressingly, the mere existence of such accusations will damage both our reputations. London society thrives on scandal. By the time this is resolved, we will be subjects of gossip from drawing rooms to gentlemen's clubs. Then we must fight it. Evelyn joined him at the window, placing her hand on his arm. We have witnesses to our marriage, to Edmund's threats, to his confession about the carriage. Surely that is enough to discredit his claims. Perhaps. But legal battles take time and money. Edmund knows I would prefer to avoid the spectacle of a public trial, the necessity of parading our private affairs before magistrates and solicitors. His jaw tightened. He is gambling that I will pay him to go away quietly. And will you? Alexander turned to face her fully, his green eyes blazing. Not 1 penny. I will not reward his schemes with so much as a halfpenny. If he wants a fight, he shall have one. The resolution in his voice stirred something fierce in Evelyn's chest. This was the man who had pulled her from a cliff, who had offered her protection and eventually love. Edmund had underestimated him if he believed threats and legal maneuvering would succeed where more direct methods had failed. What do? We go to London. We face this directly, present our evidence, and expose Edmund for what he is. Alexander's hand covered hers where it rested on his arm. It will not be pleasant. Society will scrutinize every aspect of our marriage. There will be whispers and speculation. Can you bear it? With you beside me, I can bear anything. The journey to London took 2 days, during which Alexander occupied himself writing letters to his solicitor, to various connections in Parliament, and to Mr. Wexford, instructing him to gather every piece of evidence regarding the Carriage sabotage. Evelyn watched him work with quiet intensity, marveling at the transformation from the courteous but distant duke she had first met to this focused warrior preparing for battle. They arrived at Alexander's London residence, a grand townhouse in Mayfair, that made Northmere Hall seem almost modest by comparison. Servants appeared immediately to unpack their belongings and settle them into their apartments, but Alexander allowed them no rest. "We have an appointment with my solicitor in 2 hours," he informed Evelyn, as they reviewed the schedule over hastily consumed tea. "Mr. Richard Carrington is the best legal mind in London. If anyone can untangle Edmund's machinations, it is he." Mr. Carrington proved to be a thin, scholarly man in his 50s with sharp eyes that missed nothing. He received them in his chambers near Lincoln's Inn, spreading documents across his desk with methodical precision. Your Grace," he greeted them both, indicating chairs. "I have reviewed the complaint filed by Lord Carlisle. It is, if you will pardon my frankness, a tissue of lies and insinuations built upon the thinnest foundation of distorted facts." "Can you defeat it?" Alexander asked bluntly. "I can, but not without cost." Carrington pulled forward several papers. "Lord Carlisle has engaged Nathaniel Reeves as his counsel. Reeves is notorious for his ability to create scandal regardless of the actual merits of a case. He will drag every detail of your courtship and marriage into public view, twist innocent circumstances into something sordid, and generally make the entire process as painful as possible. Let him try." Evelyn spoke before Alexander could respond. "Every accusation can be refuted with evidence. We have nothing to hide." Carrington's expression softened slightly. "Your Grace, I admire your courage, but you must understand what you're inviting. Questions will be asked about the speed of your marriage, about your living arrangements before the ceremony, about the Duke's motivations in offering his hand. Society does not view hasty marriages kindly, particularly when one party is as eligible as His Grace and the other is, forgive me, in somewhat reduced circumstances." "You mean they will assume I was fortune hunting and he was trapped?" "Precisely. Or worse, that you were his mistress whom he felt obligated to marry after compromising you." Carrington's tone was apologetic but firm. "Reeves will suggest both possibilities and let society draw their own conclusions. Then we must present such overwhelming evidence of Edmund's guilt that no other narrative holds credence," Alexander said. "What do you need from us?" "Everything. Testimony from the servants at Northmere regarding the circumstances of Lady Evelyn's arrival and the subsequent events. Documentation of Lord Carlisle's financial situation and his attempts to coerce Lady Evelyn into marriage. The confession regarding the Carriage sabotage, even though it was given privately. Character witnesses willing to testify to your reputations." Carrington began making notes. "And most importantly, we need proof that Lord Carlisle benefited or intended to benefit from either Lady Evelyn's death or forced marriage to him." "I can provide documentation of his debts," Alexander said. "My investigator has been thorough." "Excellent. We will also need Lady Evelyn to give a complete statement about her interactions with Lord Carlisle, both before and after the accident. Leave nothing out, no matter how small or seemingly irrelevant. Details win cases." For the next hour, they reviewed strategy while Carrington took copious notes. When they finally emerged into the autumn afternoon, Evelyn felt simultaneously exhausted and energized. The fight ahead would be brutal, but they would face it together. "There is one more matter we must address," Alexander said, as their carriage navigated London's crowded streets. "We have been invited to Lady Philippa's reception this evening. Under normal circumstances, I would decline. But given the current situation, our absence would be noted and interpreted as either guilt or fear. Then we attend." Evelyn straightened her shoulders. "Let them see that we have nothing to hide." Lady Philippa's reception was being held at the Marquess of Westfield's London residence, a palatial affair that rivaled the royal palaces in grandeur. They arrived fashionably late, announced at the entrance to a ballroom that fell suddenly quiet as every eye turned toward them. "The Duke and Duchess of Northmere," the butler intoned. The whispers began immediately, a susurrus of speculation and scandal that followed them as they descended the stairs into the assembled company. Evelyn kept her head high, her hand resting lightly on Alexander's arm, projecting a confidence she did not entirely feel. Lady Philippa materialized before them, resplendent in crimson silk that matched the calculated gleam in her dark eyes. "Your Graces, how delightful that you could attend. I had feared the scandal might keep you away." "Scandal, Lady Philippa?" Alexander's voice was dangerously soft. "I am not aware of any scandal worthy of the name, merely the spiteful machinations of a desperate man." "Oh, but surely you have heard. It is all anyone can discuss. Lord Carlisle's accusations, the questions about your marriage, the suggestions of impropriety." Philippa's fan snapped open with a sound like a whip crack. One does wonder what prompted such a hasty union, though I suppose when one reaches a certain age, one cannot afford to be particular about circumstances. The insult was aimed directly at Evelyn, who felt heat rise to her cheeks. Before she could formulate a response, Alexander stepped forward, his body language subtly protective. "Lord Carlisle's accusations are the desperate fantasies of a man whose gambling debts have driven him to extraordinary measures," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly attentive crowd. "My wife and I married because we chose to do so, for reasons that are entirely our own business. Anyone who suggests otherwise will answer to me personally." The threat, delivered with aristocratic precision, sent a ripple through the assembly. Philippa's smile faltered for the first time. "How masterful you are, Your Grace. One almost forgets that you married a penniless nobody to rescue her from scandal of her own making." She turned to Evelyn, malice bright in her eyes. "Tell me, Duchess, how does it feel to have trapped the most eligible man in England through circumstance and manipulation?" "It feels," Evelyn said clearly, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice, "precisely as it should. I married a man I respect and admire, who offered me his hand freely and without coercion. If that troubles you, Lady Philippa, I suggest the problem lies, not with my marriage, but with your own disappointment at having failed to secure his affections yourself." Gasps echoed through the ballroom. Philippa's face went white, then red. "You dare to suggest that I harbored feelings for the Duke? I dare to state the obvious truth that anyone with eyes could see. You have pursued his grace relentlessly for 2 seasons. His marriage to me has clearly rankled you more than any impropriety ever could." Evelyn felt Alexander's hand cover hers on his arm, a silent gesture of support. "But your personal disappointment does not give you license to spread malicious gossip or lend credence to Lord Carlisle's lies." "Well said, Your Grace," an elderly woman called from the crowd. Lady Harrington, Evelyn realized, one of society's most influential matrons. "I, for one, am tired of all this speculation. The Duke and his bride are legally married, and that should be an end to it." "Here, here," several voices echoed. Philippa looked around desperately, seeking allies, and finding few. Society, ever fickle, was beginning to turn. The Duke's direct defense of his wife, Evelyn's spirited response, and the lack of any actual evidence supporting Edmund's claims had shifted the mood of the room. "If you will excuse us," Alexander said, guiding Evelyn away from Philippa with deliberate courtesy that was itself a dismissal. "I believe my wife promised me this dance." He led her onto the floor as the orchestra struck up a waltz, and suddenly they were surrounded by other couples, society closing ranks around them in a display of acceptance that was as calculated as it was welcome. "That was magnificently done," Alexander murmured as they moved through the steps. "I have never seen anyone put Philippa in her place so thoroughly. I was terrified the entire time." "Then you hid it admirably. You are a duchess in truth now, Evelyn. Society has seen you claim your place, and they will remember." As they danced, Evelyn became aware of approving looks from various quarters, nods of respect from women who had previously dismissed her. The tide was turning, slowly but unmistakably. Edmund's scheme was failing, undone by the very publicity he had sought to use against them. When the dance ended, they were immediately surrounded by well-wishers, curious guests eager to demonstrate their support now that it appeared safe to do so. Alexander fielded questions and comments with his usual polished courtesy, while Evelyn found herself warming to the role of Duchess in ways she had not anticipated. It was nearly midnight when they finally escaped to their carriage, both exhausted but oddly exhilarated by the evening's events. "One battle won," Alexander said, pulling her close against him on the carriage seat. "But the war is far from over. Edmund will not surrender simply because society has not embraced his narrative. Then we continue fighting. Together, always together." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "You were extraordinary tonight, Evelyn. I have never been more proud to call you my wife." The words warmed her more than any number of society's approving nods. Whatever came next, they would face it united, stronger together than either could be alone. When they arrived home, Alexander followed her to her chambers without asking, and she welcomed him with open arms. Their marriage, born of necessity and scandal, was becoming something far more valuable. A partnership of equals, built on trust and strengthened by adversity. Whatever Edmund attempted next, they would be ready. The message arrived 3 days after Lady Philippa's reception, delivered to Evelyn while Alexander was meeting with Mr. Carrington. A plain envelope, sealed with common wax, containing a single sheet of paper in Edmund's distinctive scrawl. "If you value Lady Henrietta's safety, come alone to the abandoned warehouse on Wapping Dock at 10 o'clock tonight. Tell no one. Any sign of the Duke or his men, and your aunt will suffer consequences you cannot imagine. You have one chance to end this quietly. Bring documents transferring your inheritance, signed and witnessed. Otherwise things will become far more unpleasant for everyone involved." Evelyn read the message 3 times, each reading making her hands shake more violently. Edmund had Lady Henrietta, her sweet, harmless aunt who had never hurt anyone, now a pawn in Edmund's increasingly desperate schemes. The thought of what he might do if she failed to comply made her stomach turn. She should tell Alexander immediately. He would know what to do, how to handle this. But the message's warning was clear. Any involvement from the Duke would put Henrietta at risk. Could she gamble with her aunt's life? The afternoon crawled past in agonizing slowness. Evelyn maintained a facade of normalcy through tea and conversation, all while her mind raced through increasingly desperate plans. By dinner, she had made her decision. She would go to the warehouse as Edmund demanded, but she would not go entirely unprepared. "You seem distracted this evening," Alexander observed as they sat in the drawing room after the meal. "Is something troubling you?" "Merely tired. The social whirl of London is more exhausting than I anticipated." The lie tasted bitter, but what choice did she have? "I believe I shall retire early." He rose, crossing to where she sat and pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Rest well. Tomorrow we meet with Wexford to review the evidence he has gathered. Edmund's house of cards is collapsing, piece by piece. This will be over soon." "Yes, soon." She forced herself to meet his eyes, to smile as though nothing was wrong. The deception felt like a betrayal, but Henrietta's life hung in the balance. In her chambers, Evelyn waited until she heard Alexander's movements cease in his adjoining rooms. Then she dressed quickly in a dark walking dress, wrapped herself in a hooded cloak, and slipped from the house through the servants' entrance. A hack stood at the corner as she had arranged earlier through a trusted maid, and within minutes she was rattling through London's streets toward the docks. Wapping at night was a different world from Mayfair's elegant townhouses. The streets reeked of fish and tar, and rough men eyed her hired carriage with speculation. Evelyn kept the hood drawn close as they approached the address Edmund had specified, her heart hammering against her ribs. The warehouse loomed against the night sky, its windows dark and broken. The driver refused to wait, departing the moment she descended, leaving her alone in the fog-shrouded darkness. Evelyn approached the heavy door with steps that felt dreamlike, surreal. This was madness. But what else could she do? Inside, a single lantern cast wavering light across abandoned crates and rusting machinery. Edmund stood in the center of the space, and beside him, tied to a chair with terror written across her pale face, sat Lady Henrietta. "Aunt!" Evelyn rushed forward, only to stop when Edmund raised a pistol with unsteady hands. "Far enough, cousin. I am delighted you decided to be reasonable. Let her go, Edmund. This is between you and me. She has done nothing. She is leverage, nothing more. Old women are surprisingly useful that way. Edmund's face was flushed, his clothes dishevelled, desperation emanating from every gesture. You brought the documents. I brought nothing. I am not fool enough to sign away my inheritance to a man who has already tried to kill me once. The pistol wavered. Then your aunt suffers. Do not test me, Evelyn. I have nothing left to lose. My debts are called in. My reputation in tatters thanks to your husband's interference. This is my last chance to recover something from this disaster. Edmund, please. Henrietta's voice was hoarse with tears. Do not do this. I have some money set aside. You may have it all. Just let us go. Your pittance. That will not even cover a month's interest on what I owe. Edmund laughed, the sound edging toward hysteria. No, I need Evelyn's full inheritance, signed over legally, and I need it tonight. And you truly believe I would sign such documents under duress? Any court would invalidate them immediately. Evelyn forced herself to sound calmer than she felt. This accomplishes nothing, Edmund. You are only making your situation worse. Then perhaps I should simply shoot you both and flee to the continent. At least then I would have the satisfaction of denying Northmere his prize. The pistol steadied, aiming now directly at Evelyn's chest. What shall it be, cousin? Sign or die? The warehouse door crashed open with a sound like thunder. Alexander strode through, flanked by Wexford and 3 constables, his face a mask of cold fury. I believe neither option is acceptable, he said, his voice cutting through the tension sharp as a blade. Lord Carlisle, you are under arrest for kidnapping, attempted extortion, and threatening violence. I suggest you lower that weapon before you add murder to the charges. Edmund's head whipped around, shock and rage warring across his features. I told her to come alone. Did you truly believe my wife could slip from our home without my knowledge? Alexander moved forward slowly, hands visible and empty. I have been following at a distance since she left Mayfair. You have been watched since the moment Lady Henrietta was taken from her cottage this afternoon. The man who delivered your charming little note to my door never realized Wexford was at his heels from the first step. Your associate, the charming Mr. Crow, is already in custody. He was remarkably willing to testify against you in exchange for leniency. You are lying. Am I? Then explain how I knew precisely where to find you. Alexander's eyes were merciless. It is over, Edmund. Lower the pistol and surrender. Perhaps the magistrate will show mercy if you do not compound your crimes with violence. For a long moment, Edmund stood frozen, the pistol shaking in his grip. Then, with a roar of frustrated rage, he spun toward Evelyn, weapon rising. Evelyn threw herself sideways as the shot rang out, deafening in the enclosed space. She hit the ground hard, ears ringing, and for a sickening moment, thought she had been hit. Then Alexander was there, hauling her to her feet, his hands running over her with frantic urgency. Are you hurt? Tell me you are not hurt. I am well. I am well. She clung to him, her legs threatening to give way. Henrietta? Unharmed. Wexford is freeing her now. Alexander pulled her against his chest, his heart thundering beneath her cheek. Evelyn, you foolish, brave, terrifying woman. Do you have any idea what could have happened? Why did you not tell me? He threatened her life if I involved you. I could not risk it. So you risked yourself instead. His arms tightened around her almost painfully. I cannot lose you. Do you understand? I pulled you from that cliff, married you, fought for you, and I refuse to let anything take you from me now. Across the warehouse, Edmund was being restrained by constables, still screaming threats and accusations that no one heeded. Henrietta sobbed in relief as Wexford carefully untied her bonds, and a physician who had accompanied the party began checking her for injuries. I am sorry, Evelyn whispered against Alexander's coat. I thought I had no choice. You always have a choice. The choice to trust me, to let me help you, to believe that together we are stronger than Edmund's schemes. He pulled back enough to cup her face in his hands, his eyes blazing with emotion. Promise me, Evelyn. Promise that you will never face danger alone again when you have a husband willing to stand beside you. I promise. The words came easily, born of the terror and relief flooding through her. I promise." The constables led Edmund away in chains, still raving about injustice and conspiracy. Evelyn watched him go with something that might have been pity had he not just threatened to murder her and her aunt. Instead, she felt only relief that this nightmare was finally ending. "What will happen to him?" she asked, as Alexander helped her into their waiting carriage. Henrietta already settled inside, with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. "Trial, conviction, imprisonment. His crimes are too numerous and well documented for any other outcome." Alexander took the seat beside her, keeping her hand clasped tightly in his. "His solicitor will undoubtedly argue duress, desperation, diminished capacity. None of it will matter. The evidence against him is overwhelming, and his debts will be settled from what remains of the Carlisle estate after it is sold to satisfy his creditors. There will be nothing left, but that is hardly our concern." He looked past Evelyn to Henrietta, his expression gentling. "Lady Henrietta, I must apologize. My investigation into Edmund's activities inadvertently put you at risk. I should have provided better security for your cottage." "Nonsense, Your Grace." Henrietta's voice was still shaky but determinedly cheerful. "You saved my life tonight. Both our lives. I shall be forever grateful." The carriage ride back to Mayfair passed in relative silence, each of them processing the evening's events. When they arrived home, Alexander insisted on a physician examining both women, despite their protests that they were unharmed. Only when the doctor had pronounced them suffering from nothing worse than shock and minor bruising did Alexander allow them to retire. In their private chambers, Evelyn finally allowed herself to collapse into a chair, the evening's terror catching up with her in a wave of delayed reaction. Alexander knelt before her, taking her trembling hands in his steady ones. "You frightened me beyond reason tonight," he said quietly. "When I realized you had gone to meet Edmund alone, when I thought I might lose you to his madness, I understood something with perfect clarity." "What?" "That you are not merely my wife or my duchess. You are the center of my world, the reason I wake each morning and the peace I seek each night. I love you, Evelyn, with a completeness I did not know I was capable of feeling. The thought of living without you is insupportable." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I love you too, so very much. I am sorry I doubted your ability to protect both Henrietta and myself. I should have trusted you. You were terrified and acting to protect someone you love. I understand that impulse rather well, given my own actions tonight." He rose, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. "But from now on, we face everything together. No more secrets, no more desperate solo ventures into danger. Agreed?" "Agreed." She tilted her face up for his kiss, and this time there was no fear, no hesitation, only love and relief and gratitude that they had both survived to see another day. Edmund's trial began a week later and concluded within 3 days, the evidence against him so overwhelming that his defense counsel could mount only token resistance. He was sentenced to 20 years imprisonment, to be followed by permanent exile from England. His title was stripped, his properties confiscated, his name struck from polite society's rolls as thoroughly as if he had never existed. Evelyn attended the sentencing, but felt no triumph, only sadness for what Edmund might have been had he chosen differently. Then she returned home to Alexander and the life they were building together, leaving the past behind where it belonged. 5 years had passed since the autumn when Evelyn had dangled from a cliff edge, her life saved by a stranger's hand. Now, in the spring of 1828, she stood in the gardens of Northmere Hall, watching her son chase butterflies through beds of newly blooming roses, while her daughter toddled after him on unsteady legs. "Henry, do not run so fast. Your sister cannot keep pace," she called, smiling as the 3-year-old boy immediately slowed, turning to encourage little Margaret with exaggerated patience. "Come on, Meg. Look at the pretty wings." Alexander emerged from the house, documents under one arm, and crossed the lawn to where Evelyn stood. At 39, he had acquired a few silver threads at his temples, but his bearing remained as commanding as ever. He slipped an arm around her waist with the easy familiarity of 5 years' marriage, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I have just received word from Carrington," he said. "The last of Edmund's appeals has been denied. His sentence stands, and he will be transported to Australia within the month. After everything he has done, I find I cannot even muster satisfaction at the news. Only relief that it is truly finished." Evelyn leaned into her husband's embrace, watching their children play. "Sometimes I still cannot believe how far we have come from that first terrifying day. Terrifying for you, perhaps. For me, it was the day my life truly began, though I was too stubborn to recognize it immediately." Alexander's hand moved to rest on the slight swell of her abdomen, where their third child grew. "Tell me, do you ever regret accepting my proposal? The hasty wedding, the scandal, all of it?" "Never. Not for a single moment." She covered his hand with her own. "Though I confess, I am grateful we have had these years of peace to truly build our marriage without Edmund's shadow looming over us." The legal aftermath of Edmund's crimes had taken months to fully resolve. His properties had been sold to satisfy his creditors, with Josiah Crowe among those who received restitution. The moneylender had proven surprisingly cooperative once his own arrest had been threatened, providing testimony that had sealed Edmund's fate. Lady Philippa, humiliated by her public confrontation with Evelyn, had withdrawn to the countryside and eventually married an older earl, a man of comfortable means, if not spectacular wealth. Lady Henrietta had flourished in her cottage, developing an unexpected talent for watercolour painting that occupied her days pleasantly. She visited regularly, doting on her great-niece and great-nephew with shameless favouritism, and had become a beloved fixture in Northmere village society. The inheritance that Edmund had coveted so desperately now sat largely untouched in a trust fund for Henry and Margaret's education. Evelyn had donated half of it to expanding Alexander's charitable foundations, a gesture that had moved him beyond words. Together, they had established 3 new orphanages, a hospital wing for treating the poor, and a school that taught practical trades to children who might otherwise have faced destitution. "Mama! Papa! Come see what I found!" Henry's excited voice drew them across the lawn to where he crouched beside a rosebush, Margaret peering over his shoulder with wide-eyed wonder. "It is a chrysalis," Alexander explained, kneeling beside his son to examine the delicate structure. "Soon it will emerge as a butterfly, transformed from what it was into something beautiful. Like magic," Henry breathed. "Like nature's magic, yes." Alexander ruffled his son's dark hair, so like his own. "Everything changes, Henry. Sometimes the change is frightening, but often it leads to something wonderful." Evelyn met her husband's eyes over their children's heads, understanding the deeper meaning in his words. Their own transformation from wary strangers to devoted partners had been no less miraculous than any butterfly's metamorphosis. What had begun in terror and desperation had become the foundation of a love deeper than either had dreamed possible. "Will you walk with me to the cliff?" she asked later, after the children had been delivered into their nursemaid's care for afternoon rest. "I find myself drawn there on anniversaries." They followed the path Evelyn had first travelled 5 years ago, though now it bore little resemblance to that treacherous route. Alexander had commissioned the installation of sturdy iron railings along the cliff edge, transforming it from a place of danger into a scenic overlook where one could safely admire the sea. "Do you remember what I was thinking when I hung there, certain I was about to die?" Evelyn asked as they stood at the railing, the wind tugging at her bonnet ribbons. "Tell me." "I thought that I would die having never truly lived, never loved, never been loved, never known what it was to be seen and valued for myself rather than my family connections or lack thereof." She turned to face him fully. "And then you pulled me to safety, and everything changed. I remember thinking that if I failed, if I could not hold you, I would never forgive myself." Alexander's hand found hers on the railing. "I did not know then that you would become my entire world. I only knew that losing you, this stranger whose name I did not even know, felt unacceptable. We have been very fortunate, you and I. Fortunate, yes, but also brave. We chose to trust when trust seemed foolish. We chose to love when love seemed impossible. We chose each other, again and again. Through every obstacle Edmund placed in our path, he drew her into his arms, her back against his chest, both of them gazing out at the sea that had nearly claimed her. This place, which could have been the site of tragedy, has become sacred to me. A reminder of how close I came to losing everything before I even knew what I had. Then we must bring the children here when they are older, Evelyn decided. Tell them the truth of how their parents met, how love can arise from the most unlikely circumstances. A fairy tale for the modern age. The Duke who saved a lady from a cliff and discovered she was exactly what his heart required. And the lady who learned that the coldest exterior can conceal the warmest heart if one is brave enough to look beneath the surface. Evelyn turned in his embrace, rising on her toes to kiss him with the comfortable passion of long-married lovers. I love you, Alexander Vance. Thank you for catching me when I fell. Always, my darling. Always. They stood together as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sea in shades of gold and crimson. Below them, waves crashed against the rocks where Evelyn had so nearly met her end. But that moment of terror had given way to years of joy, and would continue giving way to a future bright with promise. In the distance, Northmere Hall stood solid and enduring, its windows glowing with the warmth of home. Within those walls, their children slept safely. Their household thrived under Evelyn's capable management, and their love story continued to unfold in countless small moments of shared laughter, whispered confidences, and comfortable silences. Edmund's final letter had arrived from his prison ship, a rambling missive full of self-justification and bitter recrimination. Evelyn had read it once, recognized the poison it contained, and consigned it to the fire without a second thought. The past held no power over them now. Edmund had lost everything in his desperate pursuit of wealth that would never have satisfied him. Meanwhile, she and Alexander had found riches beyond measure in each other and the family they had built together. Shall we return to the house? Alexander suggested as twilight gathered. Mrs. Blackwell mentioned something about preparing your favorite dessert for dinner. In a moment. Evelyn remained at the railing, drinking in the view one last time. I want to remember this. The peace, the beauty, the certainty that whatever challenges tomorrow brings, we will face them together. That is a certainty you may always rely upon. Alexander's arms tightened around her. From this day until my last breath, you will never face anything alone. They walked back to the house hand in hand, leaving the cliff and its memories behind. The future stretched before them, unknown but no longer frightening, because they had learned the most important lesson life could teach, that love, real love, transformed everything it touched. What had begun with a desperate grab at a crumbling cliff edge had become an unshakable foundation upon which they had built a life of meaning and purpose. That night, as they lay together in the darkness of their shared chamber, Evelyn reflected on the peculiar paths that had led them both to this moment. Alexander, the lonely duke who had armoured his heart after a loveless first marriage, learning to trust and feel again. Evelyn, the forgotten daughter who had believed herself destined for spinsterhood, discovering her own strength and worth. Do you think we would have found each other if not for Edmund's schemes? She mused aloud. I like to believe so. Perhaps we would have met at some tedious ball in London, been introduced by mutual acquaintances, discovered our shared interests over several proper courtships. Alexander's voice was warm with amusement in the darkness. But I confess, I prefer our actual story. More dramatic, more immediate, more honest in its way. We saw each other at our worst and chose each other anyway. Then I shall be grateful to that cliff. Terrifying as the experience was, it brought me to you, and you to me. Sleep now, love. Tomorrow we have the charity board meeting, and you know how exhausting Lady Harrington becomes when discussing fund allocation. Evelyn laughed softly, nestling closer to her husband's warmth. Good night, Alexander. Good night, my heart. In the nursery down the hall, Henry and Margaret slept peacefully, unaware of the dramatic story behind their existence. Someday they would learn of their mother's near death and their father's heroic rescue, of Edmund's villainy and the love that had triumphed over his schemes. But for now, They simply knew themselves safe and cherished, which was all any child required. The house settled into nighttime quiet, the servants retiring to their quarters, the fires banking to embers. In the master chambers, the Duke and Duchess of Northmere drifted into sleep, wrapped in each other's arms, their breathing synchronizing in the unconscious intimacy of couples who had learned to move as one. Outside, the moon rose over the cliff, where Evelyn had once hung suspended between death and salvation. The sea continued its eternal rhythm against the rocks, and in the morning, when the sun rose again, the Vance family would wake to another day of the beautiful, ordinary life they had fought so hard to claim. A life built not on titles or wealth or social position, but on love freely given and gratefully received. A life that had begun with a desperate handclasp at a cliff's edge and blossomed into something neither of them could have imagined in those first terrifying moments. Home. The end.